Okay, we're now being recorded. Okay, Mark, you can begin.
Good evening and welcome all to the second of two City Council candidate forums focused on climate change and related environmental concerns. I'm your moderator for this evening, Mark Hyam. This event is brought to you by the Citizens Climate Lobby of Columbia, Climate Leaders at Mizzou, Mid-Missouri Peace Works, Osage Group Sierra Club, and Renew Missouri. Our goal in hosting forums like this is to shine a spotlight on what many of us see as the defining issue of the 21st century. Climate change represents an existential threat, one that can make virtually all other issues moot points. We believe it is essential, therefore, for voters to know where the candidates stand on this critical constellation of issues. Due to the pandemic, we're once again holding these forums online. Hopefully by next year, we'll be back to in-person forums. The virtual forums are on Zoom as well as live streamed via the Sierra Club Osage Group's Facebook page and aired live on 89.5 KOPN Columbia, our community radio station. We're also recording the forum and we'll post this online as soon as we can for those who missed all or part of the forum. We also have already posted last week's mayoral candidate forum. This can be accessed through the Osage Group Sierra Club's Facebook page. Before we start, I want to thank the candidates who are participating, as well as all the good folks who've made this possible, including Ricky Ascani, our candidate liaison, Kayla Becerra, our timekeeper, Carolyn Ampran, our technology coordinator, Janice Smar, Barb Kunsting, Greta Reimar, Ricky Ascani and Carolyn Amparan, who are our question readers, and to Laura Wacker, who's coordinating the live broadcast on KOPN. We sent out invitations to all 9 candidates running for City Council this year, including the 5 mayoral candidates and all 4 ward candidates. Last week, we had 4 of the 5 mayoral candidates present. This week, we have all 4 of the candidates running for 3rd and 4th ward. In the 3rd ward, we have Carl Scala, the incumbent, and Roy Lovelady, as well as in the 4th ward, we have Erica Pfefferman and Nick Foster. We're going to be rotating the order of responses. Responses will be timed. The candidates who go significantly over allotted times, if that happens, would be muted, hopefully not. In any case, thank you all for your part in this, and I'm going to turn to Barb for the first question.
Hi there. So the first question is, there is a consensus among scientists worldwide that global warming must be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. To do this, humanity must dramatically reduce greenhouse gas pollution by 2030. What changes have you made in your own life to reduce carbon emissions? This question is this question has a minute and a half, or a minute and 30 seconds. We're going to start with Carl Scala.
Let me unmute and let me say that all forums are different. Sometimes they're introductory remarks, sometimes concluding remarks. You guys are just getting right into the questions, which is something I appreciate. And I've seen some of these questions before. There was also a questionnaire that came from the Sierra Club, the local group of the Sierra Club, a few more questions that were submitted for potential for endorsement. But let me address the question that you've asked. Um, and to answer that question, I answered yes. And I have personally invested in the planting of a considerable number of residential shade and fruit trees. Frankly, I have a bit of a big 1 acre backyard back here that I've left in second growth forest, if you will. It's the only, frankly, it's the only watershed in the entire subdivision that is left. And I can remember sitting in front of a bulldozer when this first happened to make sure that I had a chance in purchasing some of this property. I had the opportunity and the privilege of being able to do that. And it's the best backyard I've ever had in my entire life. So in addition to that, I've converted to rechargeable electric landscaping equipment. All of it. I have opted for a downsized fuel-efficient personal vehicle. Further, my home is highly insulated, equipped with Energy Star appliances, converted to a heat pump HVAC system, and has received very positive scores from the city's energy audit program. I would invest in solar, but my investment these days is in shade trees and kind of a wooded area. So solar is not much of a benefit to me under these circumstances. But wonderful question, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the answers from the rest of the candidates.
Thank you, Carl. And now we'll move on to Roy.
Thank you all for having me. And so in response to this question, 3 years ago, I purchased my home and I had an energy audit done. When I had that energy audit done, they told me that I had wonderful windows, but I probably could use more insulation and energy and exhaust on my roof. So since then, I got those things done. I also have replaced all of my light bulbs in my home as well as in my salon. To make sure that it's more energy efficient. I change my air filters regularly, and I make sure that I donate my old clothes to charity whenever I am getting rid of my old clothes. So I also have a vehicle that turns off whenever I come to a complete stop. So that's definitely helpful. Not quite a hybrid car just yet, but I'm working towards it in my next purchase of my car. So one thing that I would definitely say is I'm fortunate enough to be able to change some of the things in which some of the other third ward residents who may have not read the plan or may not have the luxury to do so, but I'll keep them in mind. And I want them to know that they're in my heart with ever working towards the change, because they may not have the luxury of doing so like I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. And now on to Erica.
Hello, everyone. Erica Pefferman. I own Como Magazine and Columbia Marketing Group, and this is especially an interesting question for me because I print a paper publication. So this is something that we discuss all the time. One of the things that we've done is really research what our options are to use recycled paper. So you may or may not be aware, since you're not in the industry, that right now is a really, really difficult time for paper supply, and even more so within the recycled paper sector of that. So we're really looking forward to that. We're actually interviewing 4 different printers right now about switching to be able to use recycled paper for our printing. In the meantime, not only do we do the traditional energy efficiencies with our thermostats and whatnot, but we also send out all of our invoicing. Not only do I personally receive all of my invoicing and pay all my bills online, but we do all of our invoicing and statements electronically as well, reducing that paper. And then our employees are all really encouraged by the fact that we have a water system here that people can use instead of bringing bottles of water or buying bottles of water. Our machine tells us how many hundreds of bottles of water that we have saved by incorporating that. This is an important issue, and I think that I'll continue to stay committed to figuring out ways in which I can make improvements in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. And now lastly to Nick.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me as well. I want to start by saying I'm going to just give you the list. We reduce, reuse, and recycle in our home. We make that a habit. We've been composting for the last 4 years and have really benefited from that and been amazed at the difference that it makes. Last year, we nurtured release of monarch butterflies and have plans for planting butterfly-friendly plants this summer. We're evolving to a more plant-based diet, honestly encouraged by our 9-year-old vegetarian daughter, who strongly encourages us in that way. One of the way we're reducing is that we're using, instead of laundry detergent that comes in a plastic container, we now use laundry sheets that are delivered to us in a cardboard envelope. We're biking and walking more, which I believe means changing mindset and thinking about doing those things more, but we do take advantage of living in a walkable community. We consolidate car errands. We have had energy use audits done and have planned for that happened before the pandemic, and we plan to replace insulation before too long. We upgraded our HVAC in 2020 with a multi-stage high efficiency unit. We use passive heat largely because we have a front porch that has windows all around, and we benefit from that. We also open and close drapes as indicated. We keep our thermostat at 66 in the winter, 76 in the summer. We open windows in the spring and the fall, and we purchased high efficiency appliances for our current kitchen remodel. We're also exploring solar panels for our house and hope maybe we can do that. All these contribute to a better quality of life, less expense, and a sense of making a difference for the common good.
All right, well, thank you, Nick and everyone. We're going to move to question number 2 now. Ricky, it's your turn.
Awesome, thank you. So the City Council adopted the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, also known as the CAP, in June of 2019 as a response to the climate crisis. Are you familiar with the CAP, and do you generally support implementation? What are your ideas for moving implementation forward more rapidly? What do you view as the top priorities for near-term implementation? And you have 3 minutes to answer this question. So first we'll have Roy.
Thank you again. Just being transparent, this was my first time reading the CAP plan, and in the document, I just didn't know about how we affected the climate. So I'm glad now to understand how we affected the climate. Yes, I support, and some of my priorities are transportation and affordability. Transportation would be definitely extending the bus routes, creating better sidewalks, and making sure that neighborhoods have bike routes and efficient for communities to use. Trying to reduce car emissions via carpooling, again, using public transportation, and having more walkable areas. I happen to live in a walkable neighborhood, and I'm proud of that. Also, I see it being beneficial for Third Ward residents because when driving around Third Ward, I noticed that not all areas have sidewalks or have walkable areas. When implementing these plans, it should be on the forefront of the conversation, the affordability. How does this affect the residents, and will it be accessible for ones who need it most? In order to speed up the implementation, I understand that not all aspects of the plan are affordable. So for every member of Third Ward, I would consider picking the ones where most can be implemented, and that will speed up the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Next is Carl.
Oh, well, thank you. As you might imagine, I go back a ways with this whole issue. Frankly, it was in about 2005 that I was one of the authors of the original renewable energy portfolio, along with Ken Midkiff. 2010 brought Barbara Buffalo as a sustainability director and so on. So I've been through this for some period of time, and incidentally, in 2005 I was awarded the Sierra Club mention, if you will, for one of Boone County and Columbia's environmental leaders. So yes, I've read the document many times and reviewed it many times. Obviously, as a city council member, there's been a great deal of public testimony. The report was incredibly comprehensive. It goes all the way from from equity issues. I noticed that some of the city counts are not, excuse me, some of the mayoral candidates in your last meeting suggested that there ought to be some emphasis on equity. There is a section in the CAAP plan for equity. And by the way, I spent, in my 22 years of public service, I spent 13 years on the Environment and Energy Commission, which eventually morphed into the new climate change group, but have been in support of a lot of these issues for many, many, many years. So the equity issues have been mentioned. There are some other, there was transportation, and this is so interconnected with all kinds of things that we do. Somebody asked the question, what is it that I would prioritize in order to try and get some of these things accomplished? I suspect that my priority would be to bring to the attention of the City Council on its bills, every bill that comes before us, the impact of a CAAP, this document, so that it does not sit on a shelf. It can't sit on a shelf, because if it does, we are doomed. We're coming too far to just leave this alone. There were all kinds of issues, all the way from coal-fired power plants and 45-year problem that we have with the Illinois Prairie Farm. We explored that to some degree. We ought to re-examine that in terms of the possibility of canceling those contracts. There are probably all kinds of huge penalties to deal with, but we ought to look at those kinds of things. And I do advocate for sure to increase the aggressiveness that we have to renewables to the 2030 timeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Next up, we'll have Nick.
Well, I am familiar with the CAP and believe it sets a standard for how city plans can be produced. I strongly support its implementation, and I'm especially grateful that the plan places equity at the forefront of the decision-making process and for the foresight to establish a commission to monitor progress. As to equity, the following directives from the plan are important: designing policies and programs that serve disadvantaged communities first, focusing policies and programs on communities experiencing high pollution burdens and poverty, health issues, exposure to climate hazards, proactively engaging community leaders and members in an ongoing basis, and using an equity checklist when implementing actions. I'm convinced that if we address climate change in a manner that is effective in promoting equity, we will be successful overall. The primary way to move the plan forward is to give full consideration to the Commission's reports and recommendations, and then act accordingly as council deliberations, staff input, and public input further shape policy development and implementation, then providing resources to city staff for carrying out the plan. Among the priorities that stand out to me are maximizing renewable energy production and purchasing, increasing energy efficiency in all buildings in the city, prioritizing safety and convenience of walking, biking, and riding transit, build a thriving public transit system, encourage reuse and reduce landfill waste, increase the accessibility and quality of habitat for native plants and animals, and encouraging water conservation. This is an existential issue, and it's important to note that adaptation is included in the title of the plan. That is significant, recognizing that even as we take action, climate change is affecting life and quality of life in our community now. And so another important priority is to prepare the community for anticipated climate change impacts. The CEC's budget input for FY 2023 reflects another absolutely necessary element: the provision of funding for staff to implement suggestions such as the development of a decision matrix, development of energy efficiency programs for housing, as well as the reallocation of staff to address improving public transit. This concern is very important to me personally. Climate change is one of 4 priorities I have identified for my campaign, and I'm very pleased to announce that Climate Cabinet Action Fund has endorsed my candidacy. Climate Cabinet is a national organization providing strong support for down-ballot climate champions, and I'm honored to have their support in this race. I'm one of 12 nationally to receive this endorsement and one of 2 in Missouri. Columbia can be and must be a leader in our state for addressing climate change. What we do here has potential for ripple effects in the region, statewide, and beyond.
Thank you, Nick. And next up, we'll have Erica.
Thank you very much. As I was thinking through this question, I am familiar with this plan, and I am in general very much in support of it, provided it's actionable and affordable for those that are in the most sensitive income brackets. This is very expensive at times. I mean, implementing programs like this aren't as easy as just saying it's something we should do. We definitely need to do it. It's definitely a priority. And there are places in where it does put cost restriction, or can be cost prohibitive to really sensitive demographics. However, I have been on 7 different trips with the Chamber of Commerce where we visited other cities. And one of those cities, so those cities were Ann Arbor, Lexington, Kentucky, Tuscaloosa. We went to Gainesville, Knoxville. This last year, we went to Athens, Georgia. And one of the cities that we went to, Fort Collins, does an incredible job of planning incentives for rental property owners, property and business owners, in ways in which that they can help implement this. I think Fort Collins is considered the gold standard in this industry. And so we learned a lot by visiting that city and looking at the way that they implemented that plan. The other thing that I would say is you have to pay for that. And I think, no, we haven't gotten to the topic and may not get to the topic of the use tax. But if the use tax is passed, which all candidates here do support, that would be roughly $5 to $10 million that are going to get added to the general fund. And then the city council can appropriate those as they want to in a budget process. And I think that if this is and should be such a priority to the city, not only should that tax be passed, but those funds should be appropriated to help make these kinds of changes possible on such a stringent and expedited timeline. So I agree with it. And I think if we agree with it as a city, if it's something that morally we feel is the #1 priority that we're facing, then we have to help all population groups find a way to get there.
Thank you, Erica, and the other candidates. We're going to question number 3. Janice, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you. As you likely know, the consultant Siemens, in their report for the Integrated Electric Resource and Master Plan, the IERMP, laid out scenarios to take Columbia Water and Light to 100% renewably generated power by either 2030, 2040, or 2050. Only the former, however, would allow us to meet the United Nations IPCC and United Nations goal of reducing our carbon footprint by half by 2030. Would you support this target date? If not, do you see another path to achieving the needed emissions reductions? You have 1.5 minutes and it goes to Carl.
Well, thank you for the question. I followed the progress of the city's Integrated Resource and Master Plan Task Force and its consultant teams pretty closely. I've attended several of the meetings of the task force. And I, as I answered in the last question, I do support an aggressive action to take renewables, 100% renewables for the city in the year 2030. And I would also explore those options, as I also mentioned before, to abrogate Columbia's 45-year coal-fired power plant contract with Prairie State. These are very difficult conversations because there are lots of penalties involved in the potential for abrogating any contracts, if you will. I regret that although I was on, I think, at planning and zoning at the time, that some of the decisions that were made for the contracts with coal-fired power plants happened during my tenure on planning and zoning, but not during my tenure on the city council. And some of those, we visited those issues a bit a couple of years ago to no avail. I think we probably ought to take another look at that kind of thing. But I certainly think that given the circumstances and the exigencies of climate change, as that we ought to do whatever we can to make sure that we aggressively tackle these deadlines.
Thank you. And now to Roy.
Thank you all. And again, I echo Carl Scholar with a yes. I most definitely would support the goal of, excuse me, sorry, support the goal of reusable, being 100% reusable. Sorry, guys, stumbling over my words, but by 2030. As long as we bring affordability and equitable ways to the front. This should be, again, as I stated earlier, a part of the beginning of the conversation, because to make sure that those who need it most can afford it. And again, those contracts are definitely something to consider whenever we're moving forward. Yes, we're in those contracts, but just because we're in those contracts doesn't mean that we cannot start the process right now. Just like thinking about trash, it's going to have to be some type of hybrid situation. We're going to need some type of hybrid situation right now in order to get that ball rolling. We don't have to reinvent the wheel or wait till we're out of the contracts. We got to start now. So yes, I would support. And yes, I would also start to think about how can we get the ball rolling now so that when we reach those points, we can effectively jump right in and move forward and conquer this goal of reusable energy by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Erica?
Let me unmute myself. I think this answer really aligns with the answer that I had to the second question. I think, when you're working with a budget, you have a goal, you have a process, you have an outcome. The faster that you speed that up, the more resources you have to pour into it, so it becomes more expensive. And so if we're looking at reaching our goal in less than 8 years, 7 years and a few months, then we have to look at making sure that we can do so in a way that rate increases have minimal impact on the people with the lowest income or even in the middle class, because the middle class is suffering through some extreme inflation right now. So ultimately, I do agree with that. And I just know that we need to collaborate together and find a way that if this is truly what we're going to do, then the city has to be willing to invest resources into paying for it in a way that we reach it without burdening those that are less fortunate and don't have the money to do the changes that are required.
Thank you, Erica. Nick?
I do support the target date of 2030. I've come to understand that this goal can be met in a relatively rapid manner through the purchase of renewable energy sources. The CEC statement regarding the IERMP makes an excellent argument for addressing GHG emissions, and I'm supportive of suggestions such as the installation of smart meters and residential efficiency programs, especially for low-wealth households. My primary concerns are whether the city can extricate itself from the contracts in place with coal-fired plants, as others have mentioned, and then the potential cost to consumers, particularly low-wealth residents. One of the first campaign events I had was in my daughter's 3rd grade class. They were studying the way that people are governed and about voting and so forth. And so her teacher invited me to come and be a part of the class and tell them why I was running, what the process was for running and so forth. And so, as I have been doing with many of our residents, I asked them at the end of the presentation, what are you most concerned about? What do you feel like we need to be looking at? And they raised their hands and several of them answered. They said the trees, they said the climate, they said the water. And then finally, someone said more diversity. This issue is an issue especially for younger people, and we need to be being attentive to that. And those of us who are older and who have not taken responsibility for this issue need to move faster, and we need to move with intention. And I hope and believe that we can do that as a city, and this is one of the ways that we can do it.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you to each of you. And we're going to go to the next question with Greta asking the question.
Okay, so the next question is, transportation accounts for a significant portion of our carbon footprint. The provision of easily accessible, affordable, and convenient public transit is also a matter of social equity. What policies would you suggest to increase the use of public transit, walking, and cycling, reduce the use of fossil fuels, and promote the transition to electric vehicles. This is 3 minutes. And we will start with Roy.
Thank you. Again, first off, I would like to say definitely keep that policy going that keeps the buses free, because I took the time out and I actually rode the buses currently. Within riding those buses, I found out several things. For one, I would have to walk 30 minutes to a bus stop. And when I got on the buses, it doesn't go past my home, nor does it go past my job. And I understand that we have enough buses, but maybe not enough bus drivers. I also took time out just to see if I wanted to get from one side of the town to the other side of town. It takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's safe to say that the bus system itself currently, as we have it, is not adequate. So in order to implement any type of policy, we must first revisit the buses and their routes and how can we make it more efficient and effective for all. Another thing will be definitely addressing sidewalks. We need more sidewalks, especially I can name at least 3 areas in 3rd Ward, most definitely, that need sidewalks. We have Sylvan Lane that lacks sidewalk, Quill Drive, most definitely Ballinger Lane. I used to live over there on Rice Road, and a lot of people frequent the Ballinger liquor store on the corner. So it's a lot of children walking back and forth. So we definitely need to address sidewalks and um also biking. So we have a lot of streets in 3rd Ward that are big enough for bike lanes, but yet they have no bike lanes or no markings on the ground. So I would most definitely support transportation, getting new routes, and make sure we're implementing sidewalks. Again, if I was riding the bus, which I did, and I would love to get them all switched to electricity, but first we have to fix the routes, the time, and make sure they're efficient for its users. That's where I would start with transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next is Carl.
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, transportation is another of those intractable. It seems like we always have all of these issues are intractable in the city of Columbia. We have a sales tax that deals with the public transportation. It also deals with the airport. It also deals with roads. So we allocate those monies accordingly. But certainly we've had a history of attempting to collaborate with the University of Missouri with respect to transportation, which would have been an opportunity, I think, to make a really successful transit system. Frankly, the ball was dropped by a previous administration, and we never really got that far. But I absolutely think a great idea to go with a no charge bus system. We're kind of awkward as an adolescent in this town. We're 126,000 people, but we have not aligned ourselves quite with a transit-oriented system yet. We have the bare bones of a transit system. We have to expand that to weekends and other things. We've been talking about smaller buses for a long time. We've always been blocked to some degree by the staff with all kinds of other issues. As far as some of our other transportation not related to the bus, we've made great strides with some of the trails and so on that we've had. And it's important to note on top of it, with the city council has made great strides in trying to get electric vehicles in terms of the transportation system. I will continue to advocate for those vehicles. I mean, there was recent news about the postal system going to 80 or 90% gasoline powered new vehicle. Outrageous as far as I'm concerned. And I think our city needs to take a closer look on electric vehicles, not only for the system, but for all the vehicles that we use citywide.
Thank you. And then on to Nick.
I fully agree that addressing transportation is a critical element in accomplishing the reduction of greenhouse gases. From my experience serving low wealth members of our community, I'm very familiar with how the lack of adequate public transit has a detrimental effect on their daily lives and impacts negatively our efforts toward achieving equity. It's hard sometimes for those of us with reliable private transportation to imagine what it's like to not have a car or to experience the disruption of having a vehicle that needs significant repair or is damaged in an accident with no real alternatives to turn to. We need a robust public transit system that becomes second nature for its use among all our residents. This is accomplished in other cities of our size and can be successful in Columbia. I'm very pleased with the CEC's work to address alignments and missing alignments between goals of the CAP and the LRTP. It's good to see the way goals are aligned. However, goals are only attainable when adequate resources are dedicated to reaching them. The CEC CATSO CAP report is a very good place to start in determining policy recommendations. To begin, the long-range transportation plan, the LRTP, and its implementation needs to be revisited and revised to reflect the goals the LRTP puts forward. It is also critical to keep in mind that CATSO is composed of representatives from both the City of Columbia and Boone County, as well as MoDOT. Public transit needs to be addressed as a concern beyond our city limits, especially as we see growth at the outskirts of current boundaries and anticipate further annexation. I encourage planners to consider the expansion of public transit to the outskirts of our metro area. And as we move forward with transportation planning, we need to first make sure that funding follows stated priorities and then assure that performance measures are meaningful and also align with stated goals. Success in these initiatives will result in less use of private gas-powered vehicles and better health for our community. By the way, I was encouraged to notice during the Super Bowl the number of ads for electric vehicles. This is an indication of change for manufacturers and consumers. So the city will do well to facilitate the installation of charging stations, such as the new one in my ward in front of Hy-Vee, as we anticipate increased need for these facilities.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And then on to Erica.
Hi. Okay, this is something I love this topic for lots of reasons. It makes a lot of sense to have a very robust public transportation system as it relates to climate change. You know, it does reach that there's a very aggressive goal. So 78%, currently 78% of vehicles, single occupancy vehicles is where we are, with a goal of getting down to 40% by 2035. So when we're looking at a timeline like that, that's fairly aggressive. It's 13 years from now where we're going to remove 38% of the vehicles from the road. In order to do that, we absolutely must be able to provide a robust public transportation system. And it hasn't worked here yet. I'm a big fan of just because it hasn't worked before doesn't mean it can't, you know, by collaborating together and finding solutions together. Those trips that I mentioned before that I've been on, I've been to all the different cities that we've been with the chamber, but Gainesville, Florida, they have a robust public transportation system. One of the things that they do is they added a fee, they added a public transportation fee, and it was like, I think it was very small, it was $1 or $2 per credit hour, and it was added for the students of Gainesville. And what they were able to receive from that was that all students and all staff were able to ride for free on anywhere in the system. And the reason why this is important is because it does help provide a cash infusion into the system, which enables us to use the routes that we need. Right now, as Roy pointed out, it's not usable by the people that need it most. You know, we need to be able to go to the areas of manufacturing. We need to be able to help those third shift workers. We need to be able to have more accessibility and be more inclusive of the areas that we go to. And the only way to do that is one, with an infusion of funds that help, and a great communications plan. Our city is used to looking at our public transportation as a failure. And so if we change the messaging, we change the way things look, we even still have buses in this city that still are painted Jayhawk colors. And so we just really need to rally around something. If our true goal is to remove 38%, we have to fund it. And the way to do that, there are multiple ways of doing it, but we have seen it work in other cities. Gainesville, it works. They're a city very much like us. And so if we can do it, it will help the impact. The environmental impact, it will help our workforce development, which is critically important. And public transportation system, a healthy, robust one, is one of the key things on any scorecard that identifies a successful city. And Columbia needs to stay on that list. And we can be even higher on that list if this is something that we invest in.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you to the other candidates on that question. And Carolyn, your turn for the next question.
Okay, the fifth question is, as Columbia grows in size and population, it becomes increasingly important to plan along with Boone County for development and land use management. Land use management is important for both adaptation to and mitigation of climate change impacts. Columbia has East Area and Northeast Area plans, but no plan for the West, South, or Northern areas. Do you support developing area plans for these areas? How can Columbia be more proactive instead of reactive in matters of planning and execution? The time for this answer is 1.5 minutes, and Carl Scala goes first.
Thank you for this question as well. This goes back in history. I've been around for a while, I guess. And in 1999, when I first joined the commission, there was also a group that got together about planning around the 18 watersheds that we had in this community. Ray Beck at the time was the city manager, and he gave permission for the city planning and zoning commission and the county planning and zoning commission to get together to talk about this. Unfortunately, when there was a bit too much noise going on in terms of some of the things that folks didn't like, that permission to meet together was withdrawn. But this whole idea about sensitive area obviously has come before the city council on a number of occasions. I've advocated for some of the protections, and I certainly anticipated in both the East area and the Northeast area plan, and have voted accordingly for a West area plan. I think sub-area planning is critical to making decisions, particularly as it relates to planning, but also as it guides the city council in terms of its budget process. So I answered enthusiastically, yes, that we ought to support developed area plans, and yes, we ought to especially consider some of the sensitive areas as it relates to karst topography, state parks, and so on, and some other areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Next up is Roy Lovelady.
Thank you all. So again, I would say yes, and I would support building, but because all cities' goals is to grow, but we have to do so in a smart way. When growing, we must, we must make sure that having existing infrastructure for our already existing neighborhoods and properties are up to par. So are our current streets up to par? Are our current roads adequate enough? We need to ensure areas that are affected by the climate change mitigation. While talking to inconsiderable size and portions. So if we're building up, we need to think small houses, small lots. We also need to make sure that we're reserving green spaces. And we also need to consider if we're going to build apartment buildings, which will help reduce emissions, making sure that they fit in with the properties that are around in the neighborhoods. So basically what I would also consider is when we're building, let's think about the communities in which we're wanting to build up. And let's also make sure that we're keeping areas affordable and we're doing it all affordably. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Okay, next up is Erica Pfefferman.
I think that affordable housing is such a critical issue for us right now, and that we have so little inventory on the market at all price points of housing that development is really one of the only true ways that we can solve that problem. I do think this areas should be considered to be developed, and I'm not one of those people that feels like it's either or question. I think developing and utilizing the 10 smart growth principles is quite possible. There's nothing about being able to develop certain areas to provide more inventory for our families that says that we can't preserve green space or we can't incorporate energy efficiencies, some of the other things that we discussed today. Fort Collins is a city, again, that I mentioned that I've been to and visited. They have put a wall of development around their city where the workforce can no longer afford to live in their city. They don't develop past this wall, this invisible wall. So what has happened is that it's driven the house prices in the city up so high that their workforce can't live there. Their workforce has to travel 30, 40 minutes to work, where then commuting becomes a problem. And then there's more emissions, as we talked earlier, and it's just so defeating to so many things that we're trying to accomplish, specifically things that this group cares about. And so I do think, yes, development needs to happen, and let's be smart and utilize our smart growth principles and plan while we do so.
Okay, thank you very much. Nick, you're up next.
I strongly support such planning. As I understand, there is currently a process in development for a West Development Plan, and it makes sense to plan also for the southern and northern parts of the city. It would also be advisable to revisit the east and northeast plans, as some time has passed since their adoption. This is especially significant in light of growing concerns regarding climate change, which could impact land use and transit plans. As with all city and county plans, there should be an effort to bring such development plans into alignment in order to maximize area-wide effectiveness. There are two things in particular that I want to see addressed in such planning. One is to do all we can to develop walkable, bikeable neighborhoods that encourage use of non-motorized transportation. This means planning for the inclusion of amenities in these communities that minimize the need for long automobile trips into town. And that, of course, is closely related to my second concern, that roads and sidewalks be constructed in such a way as to make non-motorized travel safe and desirable. And as I would like to see expansion in public transit, we need to be visionary with the inclusion of public transit in these growing areas of our community. I live in a very walkable neighborhood. I love being able to walk and bike to a grocery store, drugstore, professional offices, restaurants and coffee shops, and City Hall, by the way. I want to see as much of this kind of lifestyle available for all of our citizens as is possible.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you all. It's now question number 6, and it's Barb's turn again.
All right, so the question is regarding annexation of additional property into Columbia. Do you think it would be appropriate to delay any annexation of land bordering Rockbridge Memorial State Park, and more particularly the Gans Creek Wild Area, until the Unified Development Code is amended to include more protective regulations for sensitive areas? And would you be likely to support science-based city regulations that would apply to any defined sensitive areas that are annexed into Columbia? And you'll have 3 minutes to answer this question. The first person is Roy.
Thank you again for this question. First, I think the city and the community will benefit from working off the same definition of what sensitive areas are as related to further development and infrastructure. This will help bring everyone to the same understanding and then working towards the same goals. What we should do is work with developers to create incentives for developing inside the city limits without annexing, so that we can have developers creating more affordable housing. We have an issue of developers creating these houses in parts of town that not all of the community can afford. Moving on to sensitive areas like Gaines Creek and Rockbridge, we need to make sure that all parties are understanding the repercussions of clearing lands and constructing on adjacent properties in the near areas. In my time over the past 18 months, listening and attending council meetings, I've heard many people complain about developers and developing on adjacent lands near properties and creating issues due to slopes, elevation, and simple geology in the area. So having science-based regulations on development could prevent further issues. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are not just protecting the beautiful nature areas, but Columbia, we also have to protect our community and our community members. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. And now on to Carl.
My answer to your question is yes. I think we ought to delay some of the annexation issues. And I think I voted accordingly along those lines. I think there is an opportunity not only for the folks who are vested in this forum for green space and protected lands and state parks and so on. There's also an opportunity for the development community as well. And there's an opportunity for compromise. Has to do with planning that we were talking about, whether it's the East Area Plan, Northeast Area Plan, or West Area Plan, but it also has to do with some of those sensitive areas to our south that deal with the development that is coming and some of the infrastructure that's necessary to support that development. I think there is room for some of that compromise with some of these discussions. Conversation has to be framed with perspective of what's important and what's vital to the community and what's necessary for economic development. Those are two dynamics that are very important to the community. I mean, when you eventually accede to the city council, you understand that it's more than just making promises from a perspective. It's also for accommodating everyone in the community in terms of how this community functions. And part of that is the protection of a very vital and important land, but also the rights and some of the economic development that's necessary to make even some of the protection of some of these lands possible. So it is a compromise. There are no silver bullets, if you will. My inclinations are to lean towards the protection of some of these protected areas and to negotiate very stringently with some of the developers to give way to some of the buffers that are necessary. In the old days, it used to be that we were talking about buffers in terms of protecting less dense areas to more dense areas. Now we've graduated. We've come to a broader perspective on what it is that we need to protect and where it is that we need to go. And I think all of these folks need to be brought into this conversation. I think they can be. It just depends on how you approach this and how you bring these folks to the table. And I think the outcome is with this kind of public participation and participation from some of the development community and the environmental community, get us to the right place. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. And actually, there is another part to this question that I did not realize before. So I'm going to go ahead and circle back to both Roy and Carl. First, it's going to be Carl, so you can finish your, we can just go with the flow here. So part B to this question is more housing is needed in Columbia and more compact and dense housing is important to reach the CAAP goals. Would you support a process to require or encourage more density where appropriate as new tracts are annexed into Columbia? For example, eliminating R1 zoning or changing it to require more clustering and smaller lot sizes. And you have about a minute and a half to answer this question.
All right.
Carl, we'll start with you.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that I would require getting rid of R1 zoning, but I do think there are a lot of considerations. I mean, I grew up in the Planning and Zoning Commission for several years. I do think there is some room to really discuss some of the issues about increased density. It's interesting that Erica mentioned the Smart Growth Group. I was the president of Smart Growth Group for many years. And although it's true, the principles of one of the 10 is also appreciation for green sense of place. So this is all a compromise kind of situation when it comes to this. And I suspect that I would not necessarily rule out any particular zoning category, if you will. That's related to the UDC, which gave more dependability to the development community in terms of certainty, if you will, and when it comes to the planning. I hope we don't abandon that, because there is still a place for planned development. That is the ability to determine what's appropriate for areas that with severe topography and so on, in order to accommodate these kinds of compromises that satisfy both the development community and the environment community.
Thank you, Carl. And now on to Roy.
Thank you. So when thinking about building and annexation and houses in Columbia, I would definitely say, I said it earlier about small houses and small lots. I would restate that again about small houses and small lots. Right now, at least half of Columbia's homes are renters. And our goal is to get people to buy their homes. So when building homes, we must think small lots, small houses. We also must think meeting those people in the middle. So duplexes are great. So that will definitely meet and assess the needs. So when we're building up, we also have to think about the community. I'm community driven. We want our properties to stay as valuable as possible. So if we're not building to what the neighborhood has, the standard that's already there, then we're diminishing property value. While we're building up, we must also think about our future of where we would like to place grocery stores. Where could we place here next? So smart growth definitely is going to play its part. And again, reserving those green spaces. We must reserve those green spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. And now we'll have 3 minutes to answer both parts A and B. On to Nick.
I've been talking with a lot of Fourth Ward residents, and in one of those recent conversations, I learned that this particular person I was talking with works at Rockbridge State Park. So I asked them about Gans Creek and their opinion of what should happen there. They answered that they know development is very likely, and made a point of saying that Columbia is growing and people need housing. I understand that, they said. But what they are hoping for is an adequate buffer between new development and the park that will protect the park. I believe that we can be both practical and protective at the same time, and we must be. And so, yes, of course, I support science-based city regulations. It's hard to imagine another approach that would be adequate to making such decisions. That being said, economic impacts on housing and business development need to be part of the decision-making matrix. While balancing all these concerns is challenging, the times call for creative approaches to protecting the environment while maintaining and advancing quality of life for all our citizens. We need to protect our wild natural areas, recognizing the irreplaceable value they bring to our community, and we must plan accordingly. As to housing, I attended the Affordable Housing Symposium in 2020 and heard the presentation about missing middle housing. And I recently revisited that symposium by watching video of the event available on the City Channel. I was inspired by what I heard there. We are in need of adequate housing across the income spectrum. This is a national issue, and it's going to be so for Columbia for quite some time. So we need to address it right away. Missing middle housing can be part of the solution, and the new Kinney Point complex to be constructed soon by the Columbia Housing Authority may provide an excellent model. We also desperately need more multifamily housing, and so it will be good to revisit zoning and development regulations in order to encourage the development and construction of these kinds of units, taking steps to ensure that this results in having affordable housing, especially for lower wealth households. With the new tracts being annexed into Columbia, our goal needs to be that we do all we can do to see a result of more density in these areas, as well as within the current city limits. So addressing infill is another important consideration in this regard.
Thank you, Nick. And now on to Erica.
Thanks, Barb. I think that when we look at this part of Columbia, I think all Columbians will look at this as a jewel of our city, and we recognize that this natural area is vital for us to protect. And with that being said, it's very important for me, as I think through and research through solutions to these problems, is to realize that none of these are black or white or yes or no questions. So as I look at this, I would definitely think it's appropriate to delay any annexation until the UDC is revised, and it needs to be revised for many reasons. When it was originally developed, it was with the intention that it would be revisited and revised and reformed as we went, especially as unintended consequences came about. And it's been many years that has yet to be done. And I think when you look, I mean, I voted yes for parks in the last election. We all love parks. It's one of the things that makes Columbia such an amazing, beautiful place to live. And when you look at that, you have to, I think that you have to also realize, how can we help both accomplish what we need and protect these things? So when I look at the second part of this question, I look at more housing is needed. Absolutely. Would you support a process to require or encourage more density where appropriate? Require? No. Would I encourage and incentivize? Absolutely. Would I eliminate R1 zoning? Definitely would not. But would I look at ways in which we could collaborate and problem solve and use the incredible minds that are in our city to solve this problem? Absolutely. So I think that it's easy in our city for people that are pro-development or pro more housing to solve our housing crisis, immediately get labeled as park haters. But that's not true. I think we can figure out how we can preserve these sensitive areas. We should redefine and restructure the UDC in multiple ways, but specifically this area makes a lot of sense. And so I would encourage everyone, especially that's watching this, is to vote for someone, myself specifically, that is interested in doing a yes and. Yes, we can do this, and we can do this, and let's collaborate and compromise together.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you to the other candidates. Before we go to our final question, I should say that anybody who's listening to this on the radio, you're listening to 89.5 KOPN Columbia. It's one of those legal ID things that needs to be done. Top of the hour. Our last question, Ricky, it's your turn to ask.
Thank you. So over half of the housing units in Columbia are rental units. Many of these units have energy efficiency and weatherization issues, and many of the rental unit occupants are energy burdened, meaning they spend too large of a share of their income on utility bills. Would you support implementing a policy of either mandatory energy scoring for rental units, mandatory minimum energy efficiency standards for rental units, or some combination of policies to improve energy efficiency of rental units in Columbia? You have 3 minutes to answer this question. And first we'll start with Carl.
Well, yet another one of those intractable problems that I've been involved in for many, many years. I mean, even Barbara Buffalo was involved early on as a sustainability director in some of these discussions. There has always been a tension between the rental community and the landlord community, if you will, when it comes to energy efficiency. And this is the other 900-pound gorilla, if you will, when it comes to affordable housing. I mean, we've made great progress on affordable housing recently with CHA and the McKinney Point and so on and so forth, and some of the city subsidies in that regard. We also need to make great progress in terms of utility assistance and increasing the amount of insulation and so on for affordable housing, not just some of the housing that is on the high end of the market. It's always been a problem to try and figure out what the incentives are to encourage landlords to make their properties more energy efficient. But we've always used the argument that it's a marketing ploy as well. That is, if your use are energy efficient, then you can convey that to the public those units ought to be more attractive to folks renting those properties than those units that are not affordable. But somehow we've never managed to get there with providing the proper incentives for the owners, and we've never been able to really convince the renters that this is a real serious problem until after into some unit that is not energy efficient. So I don't know if I don't think I would encourage mandatory rules on this kind of thing, but I certainly would be looking toward even a renter's bill of rights, along with the privileges that some of the landlords have with respect to some of their rental units, a little stricter in investigatory role for reviewing some of the rental units, and providing incentives for some of the owners to rehabilitate some of their properties in their own interest, so that their marketing is more effective, and that overall we achieve some of the goals that a lot of the folks in this group are looking towards, and that is energy efficiency and a way to deal with the climate change that's a real threat that we are facing in terms of a tipping point here. We need to do something. We need to do it now, and we need to quit making excuses for why we can't afford it or why we can't do it. We need to work towards those goals.
Thank you, Carl. Up next is Roy.
Again, thank you. So I looked at this question because I was a renter for so long, and I finally had the opportunity to purchase my house. And yes, this has been on the radar of council for a long time. So saying that we need to work toward in the future is like one of those things we should have been doing now. So I definitely would love to say that, yes, we should create a policy, but then I think about, if we create a policy and make the landlords make the homes energy efficient, then what's going to happen? It's going to be for every action, there's a reaction. So that reaction is rent is going to go up. There's already people utilizing several resources in order to pay rent now. So if we incentivize, if we have the landlords make the homes energy efficient, then definitely rent will go up, and then it will make it even harder for those who rent. But then on the flip side, I've lived in a house before where the efficiency wasn't its best. So I found myself spending out way more money in rent and in utilities and gas bills than I could afford at that time. So in order to implement a policy, you would then have to put that on the desk of somebody else to police. So how do we police this? How do we keep housing affordable while at the same time making sure that everything is, all goals are met? I think of all these small variables, the variables to this question, I think hashing all the things out and bringing it to the table to make an effective change. Some thoughts for meeting in the middle could be small houses on small lots. I've said it before, and I'm still saying it now. Like, small houses on small lots means a lot. Duplexes, those small homes. So of course we need to fix what needs to be fixed in order so those people who are renters are not being drastically affected by the cost of energy inefficiency. So I don't know if I would go as far as to create a policy, but I definitely would incentivize for the landlord, or just make some type of way to get those landlords to be great landlords, because that's what they signed up to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Next up is Erica.
Well, I'm going to say the same thing that I've said before. I think anytime we mandate something, it really has some unintended consequences. And I think one of those consequences would be people being less enthusiastic about getting on board, meeting the goals in the time frame in which the city has stated is our goal. So if our goal is to experience a surge forward and everybody be on board, and we're looking at making our way to this goal by 2030, we need to encourage, cast vision, and bring people with us. A great example I think the city has used before that's worked really well is the energy rebate program. I did it myself at my last office. We changed out a lot of fixtures within our building and applied for the rebate program with the city, and it worked great. And I was encouraged to do so. And we immediately experienced lower utility bills, which provided us a return on that investment. But if someone had come to me and said, you are mandated to do so, and forced a timeline upon me along with the investment, it would have been really difficult for me to do that enthusiastically, or been able to figure out when and why the best solution was available. So I really do. I think that it's a great idea. I think we should lead people. I think we should use a great communications plan to cast vision about why it's important, and not use a tactic of being to really forcing people into a situation that could have, other consequences. We need renters right now to rent out their homes. We need them to be able to make a profit. We have 1,200 people right now on our waiting list for homes that we just learned about the other day at Columbia Housing Authority. So making things more difficult and mandating and bullying people into it isn't a great idea. But casting vision, giving them incentives, providing resources, and encouraging them to do the right thing in a time frame that lets us meet our goal by 2030, that's the right way to do that.
Thank you, Erica. And then next up, we have Nick.
During the 9 years I served as executive director for Voluntary Action Center, the agency significantly increased services provided for rent assistance to our community. Included with these services was the capacity to pay utility fees as well as utility arrears. The intention of this funding was to provide the best opportunity for clients to become and continue to be stable in their housing. Our experience at VAC and for other agencies is that high energy bills often put at risk the housing stability of low wealth households. This can be especially true when households already living at a slim margin of solvency are faced with unexpected job loss, a health emergency, or unanticipated expense, such as a car repair. VAC is able to offer limited support in these latter areas too, and can refer to other agencies for utility assistance, as well, such as CMCA and the Department of Public Health and Human Services. These lifelines often make the difference. Still, resources are limited. That a low wealth household could realize $298 on average as the result of energy efficiency efforts, such as those recommended by the CEC, would be highly significant for many. Also significant is the report statement that, quote, decreased energy demand from Columbia Water and Light customers will reduce the need for additional generating capacity and transmission lines, thus keeping electricity prices down for all customers, not just occupants of the improved properties. This is an excellent illustration of what I mean when I say that when those who struggle less, we all benefit. It's also important to note, as does the report, that many households with moderate incomes are also at risk and will benefit from greater energy efficiency in their homes. So the answer to your question is yes, I would support an approach such as energy scoring or efficiency standards that would at least give potential tenants, at least at every price point, a good idea of what their energy costs will be, and more importantly, will reduce energy expenses in rental units overall. To be successful, any such approach will require not only the participation, but the support of landlords and property owners. Among the incentives for them is that they will experience a more stable tenant population, meaning less turnover and less overhead costs. I want to thank you all, everyone in the group, everyone who's brought this group together. There are a lot of folks in our community who are very concerned about climate change, and that's represented by everyone who's supported this and sponsored it tonight. I just want to say thank you. And maybe on behalf of each of the candidates tonight. Special thanks to Kayla for doing an incredible job of keeping us on time as she holds up stop.
Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you to all 4 of you candidates. On behalf of the 5 co-sponsoring organizations, Citizens Climate Lobby, Climate Leaders at Mizzou, Mid-Missouri Peaceworks, Osage Group Sierra Club, and Renew Missouri. Want to thank everybody's participation. I want to thank all the volunteers, and I encourage you candidates to continue to raise these issues and bring them out during the campaign. Wish you good luck. And I will mention that anybody who missed a portion of this or haven't seen it and want to share or saw it and want to share it with others, this will be posted via the Osage Group Sierra Club's Facebook page. You should be able to access it there, and it'll be up on YouTube pretty soon. Thanks again to everyone, and wish you all the best.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks,